Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The storm outside the weather outpost was a living thing, clawing at the metal walls with shrieks of ion-charged wind. Lightning crawled sideways across the violet sky, illuminating the barren ridge where Elias Ward had been fighting to keep the station's power grid alive. The temperature had plummeted to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and frost crept along the inside of the window like a white, searching hand. Elias wiped his glove across the fogged visor of his helmet and muttered, "Just hold together a little longer." The generators answered with a dying hum, lights flickering overhead in a way that told him he had maybe 10 minutes before the whole system flatlined. Then he heard it, a tiny, metallic clatter behind him. Too light to be equipment failing. Too quick to be shifting ice. He turned, pulse tightening. "Hello." His voice bounced off the narrow maintenance hall, swallowed by the storm's distant roar. Another sound, a rapid, frantic tapping, raced through the ventilation shaft above his head. Elias froze. Critters didn't survive long on Vesseron 4's surface. Whatever was inside the vents was either very desperate or very smart. The grate gave a sudden shudder. Elias stepped back just as it popped loose with a sharp clang, and a small shape tumbled out, hitting the floor with a soft thud. It was no creature he recognized. Barely 3 feet tall, trembling, skin glowing in pulses of pale blue like bioluminescent breath. Huge eyes, too large for her tiny face, fixed on him with pure terror. She scrambled backward until her spine hit the wall, hands raised in a fragile attempt to shield herself. A translation unit on her collar sputtered to life, crackling out a terrified plea. "Please, do not eat me. Human, please." Elias blinked. "Eat you? What? No." But the little alien, Miri'Nae, though he didn't know her name yet, only shook harder, her glow turning a sharp, frantic white. She had probably grown up on stories, bad ones, about humans, being apex predators who consumed anything smaller than them. And at that moment, with his heavy boots, frost-crusted jacket, and the storm howling behind him, Elias realized he probably looked exactly like something that might swallow her whole. Slowly, he lowered himself into a crouch, hands open, palms facing her, trying to make his broad frame seem smaller. "Hey, I'm not going to hurt you," he said softly, careful not to move closer. But she didn't believe him. Her breath came in sharp bursts, her glow flickering like a broken beacon. Then Elias noticed her right ankle, swollen, scraped, maybe twisted while crawling through the vents. She winced when she shifted her weight, but still tried to push herself farther away even though there was nowhere to go. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a heat pack, the last functional one he had. He placed it gently on the floor, sliding it toward her with a fingertip. She flinched, but didn't bolt. The heat pack activated with a quiet pop, releasing a warm orange light. Miri'Nae's eyes widened. Her glow steadied, still trembling, but no longer screaming fear. Elias let a small breath escape his chest. "See," he murmured. "Not a monster. Just trying to help." Outside, the storm roared on, shaking the station walls as if determined to tear them down. Inside, in the flickering half-light, a terrified alien girl and a weary human stared at each other, 2 strangers caught between fear and survival, while something unexpected began to shift in the silence between them. The wind outside the outpost struck the walls with a steady, rhythmic pressure, like a giant creature testing the metal for weakness. Inside, the lights dimmed again, forcing Elias Ward to tap the side of the panel until they steadied. The power reserves were dropping faster than he wanted to admit. He glanced at the tiny alien girl still pressed against the far wall. Her glow had softened from a frantic white to a trembling pale blue, the kind of color that suggested she was still terrified, but no longer convinced she would be swallowed whole. Elias stayed in his crouch, refusing to stand to full height. He remembered the way she had flinched when he moved too quickly. "Are you hurt?" he asked softly. The translation unit crackled. Miri'Nae stared at him, unsure if answering counted as giving a predator permission. Her voice finally came through, thin as a whisper. "My ankle, it hurts." Elias nodded slowly, keeping his movements deliberate as he reached for his pocket. He pulled out a compact scanner, set it on the floor, and slid it toward her the same way he had done with the heat pack. She watched him, then watched the device, then watched him again, mistrusting everything equally. After several seconds, she reached out with shaking fingers and touched the scanner. A soft chime filled the room. Elias read the display from where he sat. "It is just a sprain," he said gently. "You crawled through the vents, did you not?" Miri'Nae blinked at him, her glow dimming. "I was hiding. From the storm. From the cold. From you." Elias exhaled sharply through his nose, not offended, only tired. "I am not something you need to hide from." But she did not believe that yet. Another gust slammed into the outpost, and dust rained from the ceiling. The temperature gauge in his visor blinked a warning. If the storm intensified further, they would both freeze before morning. He activated the portable heater on the floor. A faint orange halo spread across the metal plates. Miri'Nae's eyes widened at the warmth curling toward her. Elias kept his distance. "If you come closer, you will stay warm. You do not have to come near me, just near the heat." She hesitated, tension rippling across her glowing skin. Then, slowly, painfully, she crawled forward on her hands and one good foot, keeping her eyes locked on him the entire time. She settled a careful 2 feet from the heater, close enough to benefit, but far enough that she could still run if she believed he might suddenly launch. "Better?" Elias asked. The translator hummed, then carried her reply. "Warmer." Her voice cracked on the last syllable. Elias shifted his weight and sat down fully on the floor, letting his back rest against the wall. His joints ached from the cold. "How long were you in the vents?" he asked. Miri'Nae curled her small hands under her chin. "A long time. I followed the light. I thought maybe it was a shelter. But then I smelled human." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And what does a human smell like?" She answered with absolute seriousness. "Danger." Elias let out a short laugh, a tired one. "I smell like danger? Kid, I have been knee-deep in engine coolant for 2 days. I probably smell like burnt machinery and wet socks." The translation unit struggled with the last part, rendering it as fabric foot coverings. Miri'Nae's glow flickered uncertainly, the alien equivalent of confusion. She looked at him again, studying him as if recalibrating her understanding. "You did not eat me," she said quietly. "No," Elias replied. "I did not. You helped me stay warm." "Yes." "Why?" Elias did not answer at first. He let the heater hum between them, casting shifting shadows along the cold metal walls. Finally, he shrugged. "Because you are small, you are scared, and you are hurt. That is enough reason." The translation device repeated his words, and Miri'Nae stared at him for a long moment, her bioluminescent skin softening to a muted lavender that he had not seen before. Maybe trust, maybe wonder, maybe something in between. Then the station lights flickered again. Hard. The generator alarm wailed, cutting through the outpost with a rising electronic shriek. Elias's stomach dropped. "That is not good," he muttered. He pushed himself to his feet. Miri'Nae shot backward in panic. "No, do not get big. I have to check the generator," he said calmly. "If it shuts down, the heat dies. And then we both die with it." Her glow pulsed fast with fear, but she did not run this time. She only watched him, tiny hands shaking. Elias grabbed a toolbox and headed for the maintenance hatch. Behind him, the little alien whispered through the translator, "Please, come back." He paused, surprised by the tremor in her voice. "I will," he said, and then disappeared into the dim corridor where the failing generator groaned like something alive. The maintenance corridor felt colder than the main room, as if the storm outside had already begun seeping through the seams of the outpost. Elias Ward's boots clanged against the grated floor while the failing generator groaned somewhere ahead, a low mechanical moan that rose and fell like a dying heartbeat. He wiped frost from his visor and muttered, "Come on, old girl, do not quit on me now." Sparks flickered behind a half-open panel, casting jittery shadows across the narrow passage. Elias knelt, opened his toolbox, and forced stiff fingers to work through the chilled metal components. Behind him, the wind hammered the station with a deep, vibrating thud that rattled the screws in the walls. The temperature warning blinked again, brighter this time. If the generator failed completely, the outpost would drop below freezing in minutes. Elias dug into the panel and found the culprit, a cracked stabilizer coil, glowing with a sickly red pulse. Great, he muttered. Just great. He reached into the toolbox for a replacement, only to find his supply almost empty. Wonderful. One shot at this. As he slid the new coil into place, a faint clicking sound echoed from the corridor's entrance. He turned his head slightly, listening. Small footsteps. Light. Hesitant. Miri'Nae, he called softly. A glow appeared at the far end of the hall, pale and trembling. The tiny alien girl peeked around the corner, her bioluminescent skin pulsing with anxious lavender. You said you would come back, her translator whispered in her musical voice. Elias exhaled. I will. I am fixing the generator. You should stay by the heater where it is warm. She shook her head, inching closer on careful hands and her one good foot. It makes noises like something hurting. I thought, maybe it was hurting you. Elias blinked, surprised by the concern in her voice. I am all right. Just trying to keep us both alive. The generator gave a sharp crackle, making Miri'Nae flinch violently. She pressed herself against the wall, her glow spiking into frightened white. Elias lowered his voice. Easy, little one. It is all right. It is just an old machine complaining. She continued to tremble, but her eyes stayed fixed on him. The storm outside sounds angry. Will it break inside? Not if I fix this, he said, returning his attention to the coil. He secured it with a firm twist. The generator sputtered, wheezed, then steadied into a low, rhythmic hum. Warmth began to trickle back into the corridor. Miri'Nae released a tiny breath, something between relief and wonder. You healed it, she said. Elias smiled faintly. Machines are easier than people. They just tell you what is wrong. She moved closer, stopping just a few feet behind him. Do humans heal each other? Or do you only heal machines? Elias paused, his hand resting on the metal panel. The question hit deeper than she intended. We try, he said finally. Sometimes we get it right. A sudden metallic groan echoed overhead. Elias's instincts flared. Get back, he shouted. Miri'Nae darted backward just as a ceiling bolt snapped free and a steel beam dropped, slamming into the floor where she had been standing a heartbeat earlier. Elias lunged forward, scooping her into his arms before the secondary bolts loosened. The corridor shook violently, dust exploding around them. Miri'Nae clung to his jacket with desperate fingers, her glow flashing in terrified bursts. The outpost is breaking. Not yet, Elias growled, pushing them out of the collapse zone. The beams settled with a thunderous clang, sending vibrations racing through the floor. When the dust cleared, Elias looked down at her. You all right? Her translator crackled, her voice small. You saved me. Elias set her gently on her feet. That is what people do when someone is in danger. She stared at him, her glow softening into a muted violet, warmer than before. Not all people, she whispered. But you did. Elias opened his mouth to answer, but the generator alarm chimed again, this time with a different tone, one that made his stomach twist. He checked the diagnostic screen. Power had stabilized, but a new alert flashed boldly across the display. Incoming atmospheric pressure spike. External structural integrity failing. Miri'Nae tugged his sleeve. What does it mean? Elias swallowed hard. It means the storm is not done with us yet, and the next part might be worse. The alert tone from the generator console echoed through the narrow corridor with a rising urgency that made the metal walls feel tighter around Elias Ward. He scanned the display again to be certain he was reading it correctly. The incoming atmospheric pressure spike was climbing faster than the storm models had predicted, and structural integrity bars were blinking red one after another. Miri'Nae stood close to his leg now, her bioluminescent skin flickering in rapid pulses of frightened white and lavender, as if her tiny body could not decide which fear to process first. Elias forced himself to steady his breathing. Panic would not help either of them. We need to get back to the main room, he said, reaching down a hand but stopping short of touching her. The supports there are stronger. We will have a better chance if the outer frame fails. She stared at the trembling floor, then at him. Will the outpost fall apart? He hesitated. He would not lie to her. It might, he said, but not yet. Not if we move. Another thunderous impact struck the outpost, and the lights above them flickered violently, plunging the corridor into a moment of near darkness before the emergency strips lit up in a dim red glow. Miri'Nae let out a small sound, a mix between a gasp and a warning chirp from her translator. Elias scooped up his toolbox and slung it over his shoulder. "Stay close and do not let go of my jacket," he said as he walked toward the main room. She hesitated for a heartbeat, then reached out with one trembling hand and gripped the back of his coat. Her touch was barely a feather, but he could feel the desperate trust behind it. The corridor trembled as they moved, each step sending echoes across the thin metal grates. Dust cascaded from the ceiling, shaken loose by the intensifying storm outside. Elias kept his pace steady, slow enough for her injured ankle, but fast enough to outwalk the creaking protests of the structure. They reached the doorway to the main room just as another violent gust slammed into the outpost, making the walls bow inward with a low, guttural groan. Elias braced his arm against the frame and guided Miri'Nae inside, pushing the door closed behind them. The heater still glowed on the floor, its small circle of warmth struggling against the biting cold that continued seeping into every corner of the room. Miri'Nae limped toward it immediately, curling into a small shape beside the orange light. Her glow softened to a pale lavender, no longer frantic but still trembling. Elias moved to the command panel and pulled up the structural readouts. They were bad. The storm had torn away one of the outer stabilizer fins, and the remaining two were straining to keep the outpost anchored. If a second fin tore free, the wind would peel the structure open like a can of soup. Miri'Nae's voice broke into his thoughts. "Why does the storm want inside?" Elias turned to her. She looked impossibly small next to the heater, like a child trying to warm herself after being lost in the snow. "The storm does not want anything," Elias said as he knelt beside her. "It just is. Nature does not choose who to hurt." She processed this slowly, her glow dimming to a thoughtful violet. "In my colony, storms do choose. They avoid young ones. They do. Not strike near homes." Elias gave a tired half-smile. "Your storms sound polite. Ours are not." Another tremor shook the outpost, harder than the last. A mug on the far table rattled and fell off the edge, clattering across the metal floor before it rolled toward the heater. Miri'Nae flinched, gripping Elias's sleeve instinctively. He did not pull away. "Is there nowhere safer?" she asked. "There is a supply alcove on the west wall," Elias said, pointing toward a reinforced hatch across the room. "The walls there are thicker, designed to survive impact and fire. If things get worse, that is where we will go." She looked at the hatch, then back at him. Her glow steadied into a faint lavender. "You always talk like you are not afraid," she said quietly. Elias inhaled and let out a slow breath. "I am plenty afraid. I am just not letting it make decisions for me." She tilted her head, studying him with an expression that looked almost like wonder. "Humans are strange," she whispered. "We get that a lot," Elias said. Then the structural alarm blared again, louder this time, accompanied by a violent lurch that knocked Elias onto one knee and sent Miri'Nae sliding across the floor until he caught her in both hands. The entire outpost groaned, metal shrieking against metal. The wind outside roared like a living beast. Elias looked at the warning on the display and felt his stomach tighten. The second stabilizer fin had broken free. The outpost had minutes left. He lifted Miri'Nae into his arms as the floor shook beneath them. "We are going to the supply alcove right now," he said, his voice steady even as the world outside howled. "And we are going to survive this storm together." The outpost shuddered again as Elias Ward carried Miri'Nae across the trembling floor, her small hands clinging to the front of his jacket, while the storm outside screamed like metal being torn apart. The supply alcove door sat on the far wall, a reinforced hatch built to survive fire, pressure bursts, and structural collapse, but it had never been tested against a Vesseran for ion superstorm. The floor pitched sharply to the left, nearly throwing Elias off balance. He braced his shoulder against a support beam and tightened his grip on the tiny alien girl. She gasped as the lights flickered in rapid pulses overhead, the emergency strips sputtering between red and complete darkness. "Is the outpost falling?" she whispered through her translation unit. "Not yet," Elias answered, though the truth tasted less certain than his voice. He pushed forward as another violent shudder rippled through the metal plates beneath his boots. A low shriek traveled across the outer walls, the kind of sound a structure made when its frame was no longer holding evenly. They reached the alcove hatch, and Elias set Miri'Nae down just long enough to slam the release lever. The door resisted for a moment, then unsealed with a hiss of compressed air, He swept her back into his arms and stepped inside, pulling the heavy hatch shut behind them. The room was small, barely large enough to store emergency rations and a fold-out cot, but the walls were thick composite alloy, each panel built to withstand blunt force better than the outpost's main structure. The heater from the main room could not reach them, and the air inside the alcove felt painfully cold. Frost crawled along the walls in delicate branching patterns. Elias moved quickly, grabbing a thermal blanket from the shelf and wrapping it around Miri'Nae's trembling form. Her glow dimmed to a faint lavender, fragile but steady. She watched him with wide eyes. "You are shaking," she said, her translator echoing softly between the thick walls. "It is just cold," he replied, rubbing warmth back into his fingers. "Humans are not made for storms like this." A booming impact struck the outpost, so strong it rattled the alcove door and sent a burst of dust from the ceiling. Miri'Nae flinched and buried her face in the blanket. Elias steadied her with one hand and looked at the structural monitor mounted above the emergency kits. The readings were getting worse. External pressure rising. Stabilizers gone. Hull stress critical. The storm was ripping the outpost apart piece by piece. "If the walls break," Miri'Nae whispered, "will the storm take us?" Elias knelt beside her, so she did not have to look up so far. "I will not let that happen," he said, and the steadiness in his voice surprised even himself. "I fixed the generator. I can get us through this too." Another groan tore through the structure, followed by a sharp series of cracks like snapping bones. The floor jerked beneath them, and one of the emergency crates toppled over. The lights flickered, then steadied. Miri'Nae clutched the blanket tighter. "My people say storms listen," she murmured. "They say storms hear fear and chase it." Elias let out a breath that looked like mist in the freezing air. "Then we will not be afraid." "Are you not afraid?" she asked. He hesitated. He could lie, but she had already seen too much to believe it. "I am," he admitted, "but I am more afraid of losing you than I am of the storm." Her glow softened to a warm violet, the gentlest color she had shown since he met her. She reached out a tiny hand and touched the back of his glove. "You protect me." "What?" Elias looked toward the shaking ceiling above them. "Because you are small, and you are alone, and you deserve to live. That is enough." The translator repeated his words in her delicate voice, and Miri'Nae listened as if they were something precious. Another impact hammered the outpost, followed by a metallic scream as a section of the main hull tore free. The entire alcove shook, but the reinforced walls held. For now, Elias pulled Miri'Nae closer, shielding her with his arms as the storm clawed at the world outside. The structural monitor let out a new alarm, one he had hoped never to hear. Total outer frame failure projected. Minutes remaining. Miri'Nae looked up at him, her glow pulsing fast. "What happens now?" she asked. Elias kept his eyes on the warning lights, jaw tight, breath steady. "Now," he said, "we hold on. And we fight the storm together." The reinforced alcove shook again under the storm's relentless assault, sending a deep metallic vibration through the floor that rattled every emergency crate stacked against the wall. Elias Ward tightened his arms around Miri'Nae as another echoing boom struck the outpost from the outside, each impact sounding closer and more deliberate, as if the storm itself were pounding its fists against the metal to break its way in. The structural monitor above them flashed with angry red bars, its shrill alarm cutting through the trembling air. Miri'Nae pressed her small hands over her ears, her bioluminescent skin flickering in frantic bursts of white and lavender. "It is angry," she whispered through her translation unit, her voice thin. "It knows we are here." Elias shook his head, steadying her as the alcove rocked again. "Storms do not think. They do not know anything. They just happen." But the truth was harder to believe when the entire structure groaned under the pressure, each sound more violent than the last. Elias could feel the cold air seeping in through microscopic seams in the alcove, the temperature dropping with a sharpness that stung his cheeks and made his breath fog. He pulled the thermal blanket tighter around Miri'Nae and guided her toward the inner corner where the walls reinforced the strongest. "Stay close to me," he said. "This is the safest spot in here." She looked up at him, her glow fluttering like candlelight on the edge of being snuffed out. "You said humans do not fear storms," she said. Elias let out a breath that grew white in the freezing air. "I said we do not let fear decide things. that does not mean the fear is gone. Another violent shockwave slammed the outpost, throwing Elias against the wall. He cushioned Miri'Nae with his body as dust rained from the ceiling. The alcove door buckled inward by half an inch, metal shrieking from the pressure outside. Miri'Nae gasped. The wall moved. I saw it move. Elias pushed himself back to his feet. His muscles trembled from the cold and the strain, but he forced himself steady. It will hold, he said, more to her than to himself. He checked the monitor again. Structural integrity was falling fast. 20%. 15. 10. Time was running out. Miri'Nae crawled closer to him, shivering even under the blanket. When I was with my family, she whispered, my mother said storms leave young ones alone. She said storms only chase those who walk too far from home. Elias crouched beside her. Then you are safe. You are young. She shook her head. But you walk too far. For a moment he could not speak. The storm hit again, a violent blow that rattled the emergency lights. Elias pulled her into his arms and held her tight. If something happens, she said softly, you can hide behind me. I am small. The storm might not see you. Elias felt his chest tighten, a painful ache he did not expect. He shook his head. That is not how this works. I am the one keeping you safe, remember? Another seismic impact struck, louder than anything before. The floor tilted, sending emergency crates sliding across the room until they crashed into the opposite wall. The alcove door buckled again, bending inward a full inch. Cold, pressurized air blasted through the small gap at the bottom, blowing Miri'Nae's silver hair back in wild strands. The monitor blared its final warning. Total structural failure imminent. Miri'Nae clutched his jacket. Elias, she whispered, will the storm win? Elias grabbed the emergency harness from the wall and snapped it onto both of them, binding himself to her, so she would not be thrown if the alcove rolled or collapsed. Not if I can help it, he said. The storm roared, the outpost screamed, and the entire world seemed ready to tear itself apart. Elias pulled Miri'Nae close, shielding her with everything he had left. Listen to me, he said over the thunder of metal ripping outside. You are not alone. I am right here. Her glow softened, no longer frantic, but trembling with a fragile, desperate hope. Will you stay? She asked. Always, he said. The storm hit them again, and the alcove shuddered on the edge of collapse, but Elias held the little alien girl tighter, refusing to let fear or wind or physics tear her from his arms. The reinforced alcove groaned like a wounded animal as the storm tore at what remained of the outpost, each impact slamming through the metal walls with enough force to rattle Elias Ward's teeth. The emergency lights flickered in rapid, panicked pulses, barely holding on as the structural monitor above them screamed its warnings. Miri'Nae clung to him, her tiny hands gripping the front of his jacket as if the storm might pull him away at any moment. Her bioluminescent skin flashed in rapid white bursts, the alien equivalent of sobbing breath. Elias tightened the emergency harness around both of them, pulling her close to shield her from the freezing wind that forced its way through every new crack in the alcove. Another violent tremor shook the outpost, sending a crate crashing into the door as the entire structure shifted beneath them. The world outside sounded like tearing metal, roaring wind, and something else, something deeper and more primal. Elias braced himself as the floor lurched sharply downward. Miri'Nae cried out, burying her face in his chest. Elias, the storm is inside, she whispered through her translator, her voice trembling. It is coming through the walls. Not yet, he said, even though icy air swirled around his ankles and the temperature dropped with every passing second. He reached up and wiped frost from his visor with the back of his glove. The reinforced walls of the alcove were bowing inward, just slightly, but enough to make his pulse spike. This room was designed to survive a structural collapse, but nothing on Vesserin, for was truly designed for a storm like this. The metal shrieked again, louder this time, and the monitor flashed a new alert in bright red letters. Hull breach imminent. Elias felt Miri'Nae trembling against him. Her voice shook. You said we would survive together. We will, Elias said. I am not going anywhere. A deep rumble pulsed beneath them, followed by the sound of something ripping loose from the main structure. The alcove jolted violently, tilting several inches before settling into an unstable lean. Elias pressed his back against the inner wall to keep them upright. Miri'Nae looked up at him with wide, glowing eyes. "What is happening?" "The outpost is collapsing around us," Elias said. "But this room is built to stay intact, even if everything else falls apart. It is our best chance." "Will it fall?" she asked. Elias tightened his grip on her. "Maybe, but if it does, we fall together." For a moment, she said nothing. Her glow shifted, turning from frantic white to a trembling lavender. "You protect me even when you are afraid," she whispered. "On my world, that is what family does." Elias felt something tighten in his throat, but before he could speak, a massive impact slammed into the outpost. The floor buckled, and the emergency lights went out completely. Darkness swallowed the alcove, broken only by the faint violet glow radiating from Miri'Nae's skin. She gasped and wrapped her arms around his neck, terrified of the sudden void around them. Elias reached blindly for the emergency handle on the wall, his fingers shaking as he found it. A faint red glow flickered on, barely enough to illuminate the space. "It is all right," he said, his voice steady despite the panic pounding in his chest. "Stay with me." Another roar filled the world as the outer structure finally gave way. The sound was deafening, like a mountain collapsing. The alcove shuddered violently, lifted slightly, then slammed back down as debris tore away around them. The door buckled inward. Again, a sharp hiss of pressurized air blasted through the widening gap at the bottom. Miri'Nae cried out, clinging to him with desperate fingers. The reinforced wall behind Elias vibrated with every impact as outside forces tried to tear the outpost apart. Elias pulled Miri'Nae closer and whispered, "I have you. I am right here." She trembled, her glow a pleading violet. "If the storm takes us," she whispered, "will you still hold me?" Elias closed his eyes, pressing his forehead gently against hers. "Nothing will make me let go," he said. "Not the wind. Not the cold. Not the storm." The alcove groaned, the ceiling cracking, dust falling around them like frozen snow. The floor lurched again, and Elias tightened his grip, bracing for whatever came next. Because this was no longer just a storm. This was a test of who he was. And he refused to fail the small alien girl trembling in his arms. The world outside the alcove had become a single roaring force, a storm so powerful it no longer sounded like wind, but like a living creature trying to tear the outpost apart piece by piece. The reinforced chamber shook beneath the assault, each violent tremor running up Elias Ward's spine as he tightened his arms around Miri'Nae. Her glow flickered in frantic waves, lighting the dark room with bursts of pale lavender and white. The emergency harness pulled them tightly together as the floor lurched again, tilting under their feet before slamming back into place. Miri'Nae gasped, gripping his jacket with small trembling hands. "Elias," she whispered through her translator, "the storm is taking everything." Elias pressed his forehead against hers, steadying them both as dust rained from the cracking ceiling. "It has not taken us," he said. "Not yet." A sudden metallic shriek tore through the alcove, louder than anything before. The door bent inward, a jagged line forming near the hinge where the metal struggled to hold. Elias positioned himself between the breach and the alien girl, shielding her from the icy wind that knifed through the widening gap. The temperature dropped sharply. His breath turned to thick clouds as he exhaled. "The walls cannot fight any longer," Miri'Nae whispered, her glow dimming to a frightened blue. "They are tired." Elias swallowed hard. He could feel the cold sinking deeper into his bones, could feel the alcove losing the battle inch by inch. But giving up was not something he allowed himself to do. "Listen to me," he said, gripping her shoulders gently. "Whatever happens, I will keep you safe. That is a promise." Another thunderous impact shook the outpost, and suddenly the entire alcove jerked sideways. Emergency crates toppled and slid across the tilting floor, striking the far wall before settling. The reinforced chamber tilted further, then further still, and Elias realized with a jolt of dread what was happening. The outpost was collapsing underneath them, piece by piece, and the alcove was beginning to detach from the failing structure. Miri'Nae's glow spiked into terrified white. "Elias, the ground is moving," she cried. "It is leaving." A deep groan echoed through the chamber, followed by a violent jerk that nearly threw them off their feet. Elias tightened the harness, hooking one arm around a support beam. "Hold on to me," he said. "Do not let go." She buried her face against his chest. The alcove shifted again, the floor vibrating as the storm ripped away another outer wall. The door buckled inward with a screech, and for a moment Elias was certain it would fly open entirely. But then something else happened. Something unexpected. A soft chime, almost musical, pulsed through the air. Light began to glow around Miri'Nae, not from fear, but from something deeper, something older. Her skin radiated a warm, steady violet that filled the alcove with gentle light. She lifted her head, her eyes wide and glowing with unfamiliar clarity. "I hear them," she whispered. "I hear my people." Elias blinked, confused. "What do you mean you hear them?" She pressed her small hand against her chest. "Your world is loud, but mine is louder. When young ones are lost, we send out a calling light. I did not know I still had it. I did not know it could still answer." Her glow intensified, filling the alcove with a soft radiance that pushed back the shadows. Elias felt the hair on his arms rise as the temperature seemed to subtly shift, as if the light carried warmth of its own. "What is happening, Miri'Nae?" he asked. She closed her eyes, her voice steady for the first time since he found her. "They have been searching for me. I am calling to them now. I am telling them I am here." A sudden blast hit the alcove, knocking loose a ceiling panel. Elias covered her instinctively as debris clattered to the floor. But then, through the howling wind and tearing metal, a new sound emerged. A deep, resonant hum that did not belong to the storm. Elias looked at Miri'Nae, and her glow brightened. "They heard me," she whispered. The alcove shuddered as the storm raged on, but above the chaos came the unmistakable sound of approaching engines, powerful and controlled. A rescue vessel, cutting through the storm like a blade of light. And for the first time since the outpost began to crumble, hope entered the room. The rescue vessel's engines cut through the storm with a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the collapsing outpost, a sound so foreign to the chaos that Elias Ward felt his breath catch in his chest. For a moment, the raging ion winds seemed to falter, as if the storm itself recognized a greater power entering its domain. Miri'Nae's glow brightened, her small form radiating waves of warm violet that pushed back the cold pressing in through every crack in the alcove. She lifted her head toward the ceiling, eyes wide with a recognition that went far beyond sight. "They are close," she whispered through her translator, her voice steady despite the walls groaning around them. "They found me." Another violent tremor shook the outpost. The alcove lurched again, tilting so sharply that Elias had to dig his boots into the shifting floor to keep them upright. The metal screamed as another outer section was torn away. Dust and debris rained from the cracking ceiling, but this time Elias felt a strange calm settle over him. The sound of the approaching engines grew louder, cutting through the storm's fury like a lifeline. Miri'Nae clutched his jacket tightly. "Will they reach us in time?" Elias tightened the emergency harness that bound them together, anchoring her small body to his chest. "They will," he said. "You called them. They heard you." The ceiling above them shuddered violently, then buckled inward with a deafening crack. A section of metal tore free, exposing a sliver of the sky above them, a swirling vortex of violet storm clouds illuminated by flashes of electrical light. Freezing wind blasted into the alcove, nearly knocking Elias off his feet. He shielded Miri'Nae with his body as the storm clawed greedily at the opening. But through the whirlwind, a beam of focused light pierced the darkness, steady and controlled. A voice, mechanical and calm, echoed from above. "Life forms detected. Structural collapse imminent. Hold position for extraction." Miri'Nae gasped, her glow shifting to a brilliant gold he had never seen before. "That is my family's vessel," she whispered. The beam of light expanded, stabilizing into a circular field that pushed back the rushing wind and held the broken edges of the ceiling at bay. A rescue harness descended from the ring, guided by precision thrusters. Elias positioned himself beneath it, lifting Miri'Nae higher so the beam fully enveloped her tiny body. She looked at him, her eyes shimmering with emotion he could not name. "You saved me," she said softly. "You held me when the storm wanted to take me." Elias smiled despite the freezing air tearing at his lungs. "You saved yourself," he replied. "I just refused to let you do it alone." The rescue harness locked around them with a magnetic thrum. The beam flared brighter, and suddenly the floor dropped away as they were lifted out of the collapsing alcove. Below them, the outpost finally gave out, imploding under the weight of the storm. Metal crumpled like paper, disappearing into the roaring winds. Elias held Miri'Nae close as the rescue vessel reeled them in. The storm swirling below like a furious ocean, they had narrowly escaped. The moment they crossed into the containment bay, warmth washed over them. The hatch sealed shut, muting the roar of the storm outside. For the first time since the chaos began, the world fell quiet. Figures approached quickly, their forms tall and graceful, clad in shimmering protective suits marked with glowing patterns. One stepped forward, kneeling before Miri'Nae. "Little one," the voice said, filled with both relief and disbelief. "We feared you were lost." Miri'Nae reached out a trembling hand. "I survived because of him," she said, pointing to Elias. The alien rescuers turned their attention to him, their luminous eyes studying the human covered in dust, frost, and exhaustion. After a moment, the leader placed a hand over their heart in a gesture Elias recognized as respect. "Human," the leader said, "you protected one of ours at the cost of your own life. Your kind is often misunderstood, but today you showed us truth." Miri'Nae slipped her small hand into Elias's, her glow soft and warm. "He was not a monster," she said softly. "He was good." Elias felt something quiet settle inside him, a warmth deeper than the heat of the rescue bay. The storm outside raged on, but it no longer mattered. Miri'Nae looked up at him one last time, her violet eyes reflecting the lights of her people's ship. "You were not a hero," she whispered with a gentle certainty. "You were human, and that was enough." The rescue vessel rose through the storm, leaving behind the ruins of the outpost, carrying with it a small alien girl, a weary human, and the silent understanding that kindness had bridged two worlds.